She leaned in, sighed impatiently, and said, "Ma'am, this cabin is for premium passengers only." The woman in the plain black blazer looked up, smiled politely, and replied, "That's all right. I don't mind flying under the radar. The pendant." Cabin buzzed with the low hum of business travelers tapping on laptops and sipping champagne. It was a flight from Frankfurt to Washington, a long-haul journey filled with polished suits, designer scarves, and the quiet arrogance of those used to being served. In seat 2B, a woman with salt and pepper hair tied in a neat bun settled into her seat with a leather tote tucked under her feet. No entourage, no security detail in sight. Just her, wearing a nondescript black blazer, navy slacks, and the stillness of someone who had grown used to watching, not being seen. Mira, the lead flight attendant for the business class cabin, had seen hundreds like her. Older women dressed too plainly for premium, usually professors, maybe consultants, sometimes someone's well-off aunt using frequent flyer miles, but not VIPs. Not the kind that tipped big or barked orders. So when Mira approached the row and noticed the woman, Kamala Harris, quietly scrolling through a document on her tablet, she didn't look twice. Not at first. "Excuse me, ma'am," Mira said, with a rehearsed smile, though her tone edged on condescension. "I believe this section is reserved for business elite. Are you sure you're in the right seat?" Kamala looked up slowly, her expression calm, patient, a small smile playing at her lips, as though she'd been here before. "Yes," she said. "2B, that's me." Mira hesitated. The name on the manifest had been vague. K.D. Harris. She hadn't connected the dots. There was no red carpet, no bodyguard, no headline glamour attached to her presence. And Kamala preferred it that way. "Of course," Mira muttered. "Apologies." But her posture remained stiff, and as she served pre-flight drinks to the rest of the cabin, she somehow skipped 2B. Twice, Kamala noticed, but she said nothing. She had spent most of her career being underestimated. People had judged her by her race, her gender, her smile, her laugh. They'd mistaken empathy for softness, firmness for anger, being ignored on a plane. It was familiar terrain, but it still stung. As the plane reached cruising altitude, Kamala leaned back, closed her eyes, and listened to the rhythm of the engines. Her mind wasn't on the flight. It was on the meeting she was returning to, a roundtable on voting rights, another battle in a long war to protect the integrity of American democracy. Another stage where her name would be scrutinized, praised, torn apart. She didn't crave the spotlight. She just refused to surrender the stage. A couple hours into the flight, the man in 2A, a tech executive from San Francisco, finally recognized her. His eyebrows rose in surprise, and he leaned over. "Excuse me," he whispered. "Are you the vice president?" Kamala smiled gently. "Retired," she said. "But yes, that was me." His jaw tightened. He looked almost embarrassed. "I didn't even realize. Wow, it's an honor." From a few steps away, Mira overheard the conversation. Her body went cold. She looked over. Kamala gave her a polite nod, warm but reserved. Not spiteful, just present. It hit Mira all at once. The quiet grace, the modest tone, the reason her face felt so familiar. The woman she had subtly dismissed, twice, was one of the most powerful women in the history of American politics. And she had treated her like an inconvenience. During her break, Mira stared at herself in the mirror of the galley restroom, her fingers trembling, slightly. She remembered her mother's admiration for Kamala Harris. "A woman who never raised her voice but made presidents listen," her mother had once said. She didn't just climb ladders, she built them for others. And Mira had just told her she didn't belong. After that, Mira tried to make up for it, offered her champagne, her choice of entree, a warmed blanket. Kamala accepted with a nod, never mentioning the earlier disrespect. She didn't need to. Her silence spoke volumes, and it was louder than any accusation. Later in night, the flight turbulence hit, mild but enough to jostle drinks. Mira rushed down the aisle, bracing herself between rows. When she reached 2B, she noticed Kamala calmly comforting a nervous older passenger across the aisle, holding her hand, reassuring her. "We're all right. Just some bumps. Like politics. It passes." Mira stood there watching her, the way she made herself small so others could feel seen. The way she radiated strength without saying much at all. Before landing, Mira approached again. "I just wanted to say I'm sorry," she said quietly. "I didn't recognize you. I didn't treat you the way I should have." Kamala looked up, soft and steady. "That's all right," she said. "Respect shouldn't depend on recognition." Mira felt her throat tighten. Kamala added, "But thank you for saying something. That takes courage, too." As they disembarked, cameras finally emerged, snapping quick shots of Kamala in the terminal. No press conference, no statement, just her, walking toward another meeting, another room where she'd again be the most underestimated person present, and still the most powerful. Mira watched her disappear into the crowd and knew something had shifted in her. Not just guilt, but perspective. From that day forward, she never judged a passenger by appearance again. Because once, she'd looked at the most powerful woman on that plane and almost missed her completely. The plane touched down at Dulles International Airport just after sunset. Kamala stepped off without ceremony, her steps measured, her shoulders calm. Mira, the flight attendant, lingered at the terminal gate, watching her disappear into the current of officials, aides, and cameras. But Kamala's silence echoed louder than any lecture Mira had ever received. Not just a dignified response. It was a mirror. One that showed Mira her own instincts, the unconscious belief that power looked a certain way, dressed a certain way, acted a certain way. Kamala had disrupted that image by simply being, calmly, quietly, unquestionably, herself. That night, Mira couldn't sleep. She called her mother, a retired schoolteacher from Detroit. "Mom," she said, "have you ever done something that felt small but later you realized it said everything about you?" Her mother was quiet. Then, "Honey, that's how you know you've started growing." Mira didn't tell her it was about Kamala Harris, but her mother must have known. 2 weeks passed. Mira began noticing things she never paid attention to before, how first-class passengers often received smiles even before they spoke, how older women of color were offered less eye contact, how she herself had practiced smiles more for suits than saris. She changed, not loudly, not dramatically, but steadily. She started greeting everyone with the same warmth. She learned names instead of just seat numbers. She stood a little taller when she spoke to passengers, who seemed invisible to others. But something else changed too. Her ambition. She had once dreamed of managing a luxury airline brand. Now, she started volunteering at the Aviation Union to work on inclusive training programs. She pitched a module called Grace in the Skies, focused on unconscious bias and respectful service. Inspired by an unforgettable passenger, she never said Kamala's name. She didn't need to. 6 months later, Kamala Harris gave a keynote speech at Howard University, her alma mater. The crowd was electric, filled with students, leaders, and citizens who saw her as a symbol of both perseverance and poise. Mira was there, in the middle row. She wasn't press. She wasn't invited as a VIP. She had just bought a ticket like everyone else. Kamala walked to the podium wearing that same quiet strength, the same expression she wore on the plane. Her voice didn't thunder. It didn't need to. Sometimes, the most important room you enter is the one where no one expects you to speak, and you choose to anyway. Mira felt tears gather. She realized this speech wasn't about politics. It was about presence, about seeing people who are overlooked, hearing voices ignored, holding space where none is given. As the speech ended, the crowd rose. Kamala smiled, out across the audience, her eyes scanning, connecting. For a flicker of a second, their eyes met. Kamala didn't show recognition. She didn't need to. But in that glance, Mira saw everything she needed. Forgiveness, respect, and the unshakable reminder that real power doesn't ask for attention, it earns it through dignity. Kamala rarely spoke about that flight. She didn't need to. Her entire life had been a collection of such moments, ones that stung briefly, then slowly folded into the deeper layers of her resilience. But this one lingered in her mind. It wasn't the rudeness. It was the apology. Most people didn't come back to apologize. In politics, in power, in life, people moved fast. Mistakes happened and disappeared into the current. But Mira hadn't just noticed. She had owned it. And that, Kamala thought, was rarer than respect. Back in Washington, Kamala met with a group of young public service fellows. One of them asked her during a fireside session, "Madam Vice President, what do you think real leadership looks like?" She paused. "It looks like someone who doesn't need to be right, just ready to grow," she said. "Leadership," she added, "is not in the sound of your voice. It's in what your silence teaches others." And though no one else in that room knew it, she was thinking of a flight, and of a flight attendant who learned how to land. Months later, Mira was invited to speak at a diversity and inclusion seminar in her airline's leadership academy. She hesitated at first. She wasn't a politician or an academic, just a woman who had made a mistake, seen herself clearly for the first time, and changed. But she stood in front of the room, pilots, executives, staff, and told the story, not with names. She protected that. But she spoke of a woman in 2B, how she overlooked her, how the woman showed grace, not anger, and how that moment cracked something inside her that had long gone unquestioned. "She didn't demand anything," Mira said. "She just looked at me, and in that look, I saw everything I had missed." Afterward, one young trainee approached her. He was quiet, nervous. "My mother's been cleaning planes for 20 years, he said. "She says people rarely look her in the eye. You made me want to be different." Mira smiled and gently said, "Then you already are." Years had passed. Kamala Harris no longer held office. Her hair was now fully silver, her walk slower, but her presence just as commanding. She spent most of her time mentoring young leaders, writing, and occasionally traveling for quiet speaking engagements that drew smaller, more intimate crowds. One fall afternoon, she boarded a flight from Chicago to Atlanta. It was a smaller aircraft. No business class, no distinction. Just rows of travelers in sweaters and scarves, heading toward family or work or something in between. As she made her way down the aisle, a flight attendant standing near row 6 turned and froze. It was Mira. Her eyes widened, but she quickly regained composure. She hadn't seen Kamala Harris since that day. Time had carved lines deeper into her face, but the poise, the gentleness and power in her eyes, hadn't faded a bit. Kamala looked at her and smiled. "You look familiar," she said. Mira laughed quietly. "We've flown together once before." Kamala nodded. "I thought so. You've changed." Mira blushed. "You did that." For a moment, they stood in the narrow aisle, two women who had once shared a plane, but now shared something far deeper. A story, a lesson, and a legacy. Kamala leaned in, voice soft. "And what have you done with the wings you earned?" "I teach now," Mira replied. "I train new flight attendants. I start every class with one story, yours. I don't name you. I just tell them what happens when you miss the person right in front of you." Kamala smiled wider, warmer. "That," she said, "is how we change the sky." As passengers shuffled in and the moment passed, Mira moved down the aisle with a lighter step. Kamala sat by the window, looking out as the plane rolled toward the runway. Somewhere over the clouds, she whispered to herself, respect doesn't retire, and power, real power, doesn't need to be seen. And this time, when Mira passed her row, she didn't just offer water or wine. She offered a nod, one that said, "I see you, I remember, and I've never forgotten."